Welcome to the wonderful world of Scientology. Miniature zucchini sculpturing. Nude tap dancing. All of that possibly notwithstanding, pick up a piece from the last time we were taping when, if I may quote someone, it was noted something along these lines that if you did not allow ordinary intellect to say why, to tell you why, or to even tell anyone else why you particularly liked or disliked anything, then what you would be left with, if anything, would only be primary reasons. Now let's see if we can encourage one and all to expand any view and your consideration of it down to this variation, out to this variation. If you did not say the same way, that is, allow your ordinary intellect to comment, if you did not say why you like or dislike a person, you would be left with something that would be out of the ordinary for this planet. Because what you would be left with, if you still had any feeling toward the person, like or dislike, what you would be left with then would not be secondary feelings. And I'm going to have to, since I have made up this whole, since I have revealed this whole kingdom of such things as primary and secondary activities and interests and etc., at least for the time being, as always, in an ad hoc manner, I can put this in and say that there would be such things as, for the time being now, and just for the sake of this discussion, that there would be, let's take the negative side of feelings. Because most people are concerned, they believe they're concerned, they believe that there should be something done about their dislike of their fellow man, not their like of their fellow man. You do not find life having wired itself up through humans for people to go around wringing their hands or going to a psychiatrist over the fact that they like their fellow man or that they approve of their mother or father too much. So let's take the dislike. It's still true for like, but let's lay on that for a minute, at least a moment. That if you did not say why you disliked another person, a person now, not a thing, a person, then any feeling that you still had of a negative nature would have to be, if there was one left, would have to be then primary. And so in that area, let me say that there would be two kinds of negative feelings. Let's call them secondary irritations and then primary hatred. And I think that some of you will be able to get a glimpse of why I made such an ad hoc distinction. In spite of spatial appearances, in spite of the ordinary thinking in space, beliefs, history to the contrary, people do not dislike each other for secondary reasons. Now, if that was as commonly recognized as being valid as it might be to some of you after you consider this a bit further, it would wipe out almost all of human history. It'd have to be rewritten, which would at least give some of the academics a new lease on life, if not their office space. But it would about do away with all history. It would about do away with all of not only the history that you've absorbed, but your own ideas now of what you think is going on in the world. All the kinds of conflicts, all the way from an individual mugging another individual to armed confrontation between religious groups, between splinters of religious groups, between nationalities. People do not actually hate one another. It is not real primary dislike for secondary reasons. That is, for political reasons. That is, for religious reasons. But notice right there on the surface, if that be valid, if that was more, in a more complex world, if that was a better representation of what is going on with man, again you're faced with just abject foolishness. Because you have people right now dying. It's nothing new. But you have people right now dying, and with their dying breath, they will tell a reporter that at least I took another Catholic with me, or I took another Jew with me, or I took another Arab with me, or I took another Irish or another English, British soldier with me. And they will say that. And you accept it. And if you're wired up in such a way that if you happen to be Jewish or Irish or whatever, and you were ordinary, you might be listening to the TV and go, right on. If I was over there, you know, I'd die along with you. I just hate that I'm not over there, but I've had a bad cold for the last several years. Just couldn't make it over. People do not hate each other on that level. That is not, in a more complex view, that is not the wiring system of humans through life. I give you a way that you can look at it. This shouldn't surprise some of you as soon as I say it. But true hatred, real animosity, is never vocally based. Real hatred is silent. So anytime, now of course this does not belie the fact, you've got to remember, that we do not have actual quantum changes in the wiring of humanity nor in any of the activities of humanity. So it is not some sort of clear jump, even if there were separate entities like primary areas of interest in humanity or in an individual, and secondary. And so what even comes out to be secondary activities, as I've tried to show you before, like dining, is a secondary version of eating. Love is a secondary variation, a secondary growth out of sex. You can look at it that way. Those are just two examples that you should be able to see, and it's not that the secondary activities are in some way suspect or that they are running amok. It is part of the natural progression of man. But for operational purposes, that is, it is useful and you can feel it. You can find it in yourself and you can see it in life. The distinctions are worthwhile. I wouldn't drag them out. I wouldn't make them up. That is, I wouldn't reveal these secret information. Animosity that is verbalized is not primary. Now, as often, those of you who can hear it, I can give you examples. There's an obvious one, at least with men, a lot of you men, that life is allowed to filter out in life. Not that all men go by it or all men would trust their nose to it, but men will stand around and say such as this, and it's based on reality of a more complex nature. That is, guys maybe almost have a physical confrontation in a bar. And maybe somebody separates from the bartender, says, none of that in here, and so they separate, and one of the potential physical litigants will walk away to his friends, and maybe they'll say, well, that guy was, he was really mad. Yeah, but I didn't really want to fight him. And then maybe some other guys say, well, the way he kept talking, I was ready to jump in and help you, old buddy, but the way he kept saying, you can't talk that way, you know, you keep fooling around me and I'll bust you. One guy, very common, will say to somebody else, he'll say, people that keep talking like that, they're not going to fight. They don't fight. And a lot of guys will go, yeah. Not that they understand it, and not necessarily that they live by it, because the guy could have wet his pants while this other guy kept saying, hey, you're about to get it, sucker. But there is validity to that. They may end up in a fight. Somebody that keeps on saying, all right, I'm warning you, you take back what you said about the Mets. You can't talk that way about Muslims. It may keep on, and they may end up wrestling around the floor, but you're dealing with secondary animosity. You're normally dealing also with this. Nobody's going to get carried away to the emergency ward, because real, that is primary hatred, is silent. It does not talk. So now put this back in your own backyard if you want to try to use this. The dislikes you have of people individually, the dislikes that you think you're wired up, or that you may even think, if you're back left to your own devices, that you have good rational reason to dislike whole groups of people somewhere. Think about it, because I am giving you a valid measuring tool that's out of the three-dimensional grasp of intelligence, and that is that only secondary irritations, secondary affairs, it is a secondary level, is, you may call it hatred. I'm just trying to get you to realize, even as you're beginning to think about it, shades of differences. I was calling it irritation, but you can say, all right, I was brought up to hate some group. All my life I thought I hated some group or some type of person. But notice what it takes. Notice what is involved, the amount of vocalization, at least to yourself. You must talk about why. You must, and this is not psychological. Again, if we were playing psychology, it could sound like it, and I could pursue it. But it is if we were playing psychology, it would be as though you were saying that someone does not have a real full-fledged, dyed-in-the-wool, deep-rooted hatred, and so therefore they got to keep reinforcing it by talking about it. That's not it, but that too is based on reality. That is the reality of energy flowing in the same way that supports the way a particular system is working. But that is secondary animosity. You can call it hatred, irritation, but it is not the kind that is deadly. And it is not the hatred. It is not that, in other words, that particular form of energy. Humans call it hatred, but it is not the energy that's actually involved that moves large numbers of people and individuals to homicide. It is not what starts wars. It is not wars over religion. It is not armed conflicts going on right now in areas of the world within just one small territory. That they are dying, waving flags over the name of religion or over some chauvinistic claim of territory. Now they say that. At least you doubt the power of secondary affairs. Ordinary intelligence, if it was responding to what I'm saying now, could say, well, boy, are you wrong? Because you're inferring that secondary affairs such as parochial feelings of religion are not that serious, and yet there are people dying right now, and their dying breath they holler, long live Allah, or bless the Pope, that they died for that. And so ordinary intelligence can say, that is pretty strong. Now, I didn't say the secondary interest and activities were not strong. They're strong enough that they are absolutely required for the average person. It is required for humanity in general to be driven, to have, almost do or die in certain cases, interest in secondary affairs. But I'm telling you, it does not in some way like Aretha. Don't anybody keep writing me. It's just she's one of my favorite singers. Springing from the head of Zeus. You didn't know she was that old. It is not that. It is not suddenly that religious animosity. It is not that nationalistic jealousies, fights over living space around some river, around some oasis. It is not that it suddenly springs forth full blast and back to individual levels of one person killing another simply for secondary reasons. It did not start there. And the more that is being talked about, the more that it must be supported by vocalization, the more I'm telling you that it is, in the same way as that barroom fight, if those of you who didn't follow it, such as women, but the idea that if, all right, this guy keeps talking, he wasn't really wanting to fight you, or he wouldn't have kept saying, I'm going to whip your ass, I'm going to whip your ass, he would have done it. Some guys not. That is closer to the reality of it. That is the basis of real negative energy, real hatred. It is silent. There's another aspect, if you can follow this, it gets tricky, as though I had to warn you. That is, you can look at it in another peculiar way. Secondary feelings. Let me continue to call them that. Remember that for our ad hoc purposes, I'm saying anything that was just not strictly sex-based, territorial-based, staying alive-based, and did not even require any verbal support. And that's absolutely ludicrous. For you people getting this on tape at some other time in some other place, there is in no way I'm inferring that you should live like that, because you couldn't begin with, but it would not be of benefit to you. But for the sake of trying to see that, which is not normally available in 3D view, start in that manner. That anything other than that kind of nonverbal, and it would literally be sans any need to speak of it. But other than that, then let's call everything else secondary. It's still based somewhere on primary needs. There's no doubt about it. People cannot simply make up a secondary interest. You can go away if you're really desperate for a hobby and you're tired of nude clogging, and go off and try and make up a secondary interest. Try to come up with a hobby that's got no basis in primary affairs of man. I'd love to hear about it. Not enough to hear about it, but I'd love to hear about it. Yeah. And if you can do that, of course, you can go out and draw an original monster, a beast that doesn't exist. And plus, you'll be able to tell me what you're going to say next, which is really good. So secondary feelings, let's just call them that. Secondary feelings, relatively speaking, which is all we can do verbally in the 3D world, but secondary feelings are spatial, whereas primary, relatively speaking, would be temporal. Think about it a second. All right, a moment. Thus, another I suggest some of you may find an interesting aspect of this. Secondary feelings, the more they are secondary, the easier it is to defeat them by physical separation. Out of sight, out of mind. We had a love affair that just wouldn't cool down until she moved to Jackson. And then I didn't see her for 2 or 3 weeks, and I don't know. Or, God, I hated that son of a bitch. I was ready to kill him. And then they transferred him to another department across town, and I forgot about it. But real hatred, primary hatred, can transcend not only space but time. Real hatred can transcend death. That's how people can hate the dead. Of course, it's getting more secondary if they got to talk about it. But when you get down to primary feelings, because what you're talking about, those of you who hadn't figured this out at all, it's got nothing really to do with psychological commentaries other than it being the basis of it, is we're talking about energy. And the closer the energy is to the primary flow, the less it is affected by that which seems to be the quantum changes and alterations in human life, such as death, because the energy keeps going. But when the energy is almost singular, at least as far as you can observe, human, then when you die, it's like when somebody dies, you kind of quit hating them, if you're ordinary. Or when they die, you kind of quit loving them. Now, you may keep a picture of them, and somebody may mention them, and you go, oh yes, I still think about him or her. But the feeling, all you got to do is be separated. The closer it is to being singularly human on this planet. That's all you got to worry about. The more we're talking about it being secondary. And they are, what I wanted you to see was when you're talking about trying to look where I'm trying to sketch, what I'm calling secondary is spatially based, because it can be dramatically affected. What people call hatred. Surely you heard my examples. All you got to do is separate people physically. They can be there in a bar, 2 individuals ready to kill each other, apparently. And the bar says, hey, come on. Get the hell, hey, listen, you get out of here. Or maybe they both, don't look like they want to leave. And he says, all right, you go back there in the corner, go back there, you guys cool down. And they simply separate them about 20 feet away, and it's like it's all over. Go from there to my example such as love. Out of sight. They transferred my boyfriend, and I don't know, I got lonesome, and blah, blah, blah. The more it is secondary, the more it is spatially based. But the closer it is to primary, it becomes temporal, and it can cross boundaries, which what seems to be 3-dimensional boundaries, not only space, but as I was trying to infer to you, even what would seem to be the ultimate, from the 3-dimensional view, spatial and temporal, break would be death, because real hatred, you don't have to worry about this, or if it sounds strange, don't go out and try to practice it, but just trust me, real hatred, which is actually just a form of energy, but real hatred can go way beyond the grave. Real hatred can go on and on. And real hatred, just spatial differences, means nothing. Because if it's real hatred, you can move, you can separate 2 people. That doesn't mean that the hatred doesn't go on. That is the primary emotion. What you're dealing with then, if you can begin to get a feel of it, is what everybody else calls ordinary emotion. Positive, negative, indifferent. What everybody else calls ordinary emotion, what man is wired up to call ordinary emotion, is absolutely earthbound. It is never transcendental. That is, it cannot escape the whole of everyday 3-dimensional affairs. And then I would suggest to you further is the continuing, heretofore it's always been in religion, the religious dreams, the religious ideas of some kind of extraordinary emotion. They normally call it a spiritual state or ecstasy or being at one with the cosmic forces. All they're trying to say is, it is life trying to grow again through man, and what they're trying to express, what life is trying to express in the crude way that man talks and thinks right now, is a kind of awareness that the emotions we have here are secondary in nature. They are spatial. They do not move easy. It's as bad as trying to keep certain foods over the weekend. They spoil from space to space, and they're absolutely, as far as humans can tell, non-transferable temporally. And so then the dreams come out of some kind of extraordinary emotion. Ideas of gods that just have emotions that are stupefying. I would suggest to you that what is driving humanity without them being able to put it into words that way is they don't know my terms, of course, which was not the point, but that they have this feel already, that life allows out, that there are, I'll use my terms, that there are some kind of primary emotions that are even temporal. They can transcend space, even death. And then there are emotions that seem to be of supreme importance to ordinary people. Look in the Ten Commandments. By the way, if you can read the Ten Commandments, there are two versions. I don't mean look in two different Old Testaments, but there's a primary way to read it and then a secondary way to read it all over the world, different cultures. But at any rate, besides the primary emotions, then there are the secondary emotions that people have always had this general feel for, even though they're claimed to be, assumed to be by the majority of people at any time, important. Greed, jealousy, envy, slight irritation, having your nose out of joint. That all these things, ordinary people, under the right conditions, are generally wired up that they would say, yeah, that kind of stuff, everybody says it's important, but when you get right down to it, compared to facing death, I guess petty jealousy because the guy at the other desk next to me in the office, they gave him a new phone and they let him pick out the color, and I still got an old beige one. I guess when it gets down to it, that's not as important as you finding out that your mother was dying. They say that under right conditions, and yet there is no continuing knowledge of this. There is no operational knowledge that this is true. Thus it comes out, I'm suggesting to you, in mythologies, in the religious ideas of some kind of extraordinary emotion. In the same way I was challenging you to draw a beast that doesn't exist. All of you should know that, but now you can't. You'll end up sticking a hippopotamus head on a unicorn. They cannot make up what would be extraordinary emotions, even when they attribute them to their gods. What kind of big deal is it? Now, when you were ordinary and growing up in your religion, if you did, or hearing it now, you take the descriptions from all religions that are gods, it's just the way your life is wired up, that you're generally a little bit impressed, at least enough to keep your mouth shut, that they start detailing the wonders of their God. And if you just try and give it sort of a clinical listen, what do you hear? It's not extraordinary emotions, passions that the gods are said to represent. Think about it. It's not extraordinary, and yet the basis of it, the energy fueling it, is that kind of non-verbal awareness that the emotions that we now have, that by and large are accepted as running our lives, are not actually primary. That they're not as actually functional, inescapably functional, as we think they are. And the religions also reveal that by taking the basic secondary emotions and saying, tut tut, thou shalt not covet, thou shalt not try and get in thy neighbor's husband or wife's pants. You shouldn't cheat people. They take that which seems to be very basic, but which I'm telling you, I'm suggesting at least, is secondary emotions, but that which seems to be the kind of basic drives that keeps humans congregating together in little groups, and then points them out and says, no. If any of you followed as convoluted as this turned out, then life allows this to seep out, and people, without knowing it, without being able to verbalize it, here and there, collectively, know that what seems to be the important emotions in life are not really. Which, when people get close to death or get frightened by death or are laying there dying, it's surprising how unenvious they can become, how unjealous they can become. What else? How broad-minded religiously. If you got some uncle that was a fervent anti-something or other, they hated some religion, some race, some nationality, It's surprising how accommodating and how broad-minded, how tolerant the man becomes when there's no doubt he's dying. That's not a pick on your poor uncle, because he obviously had his own problems. But it is a kind of, I repeat again, a nonverbal awareness that life allows to seep out, at least collectively. It doesn't do individuals any particular good. That these secondary feelings, as strong as they seem to be, that once you're up and around, if you're not laying there dying, back to what I was saying, that people accept the fact that it is a primary hatred that one group of religious people have for another, because they'll kill each other, they'll die for it. So therefore it's got to be important. To me, calling it secondary is, I just missed the point, right? But then they also, coevally, when the time is right, have this awareness that when faced with real primary problems, such as I'm about to die, these emotions that seem to be absolutely worldwide and seem to be inherently a driving force in humanity, they suddenly, I'm talking about suddenly, just go and you shed them. That you had this uncle that was the most intolerant, racist, bigoted person. Now he just talks that way all the time, and he goes to the doctor and he said, I've had this little cough, and they put him through a couple of hours, and they say, I hate to tell you, one lung's gone and your other lung is about the size of a postage stamp. I'd figure you got about 2 days to live. I'm talking about suddenly, the man, if you suddenly rush up and want to hand him some kind of racist literature, or say we're having a bigots meeting down the street, do you want to join us? He's suddenly not going to join you, but if he's over crying and shaking, he's probably going to say, no, don't do what I did, nephew or son or whoever you are, don't go down there. No, leave everybody alone. Jesus, life is tough enough. Don't do that. That's what you call, I think it used to be called, deathbed conversion. The only reason I bring this up for you people is, again, that there are feelings, emotions that are accepted without any analyzation, other than psychologists playing with themselves. But that these kinds of racial, nationalistic, religious, these group hatreds are basic. That they have been running history. But yet at the same time, life has not had arranged for people to be wired up in such a way that they are aware of the fact that under given conditions, the most rabid, racist, hateful person can, just about that fast, suddenly, that kind of negative emotion, that kind of hatred and animosity that seemed to have been the driving force in this guy's life, he finds out he's going to die, and 10 minutes later he's grabbing you saying, don't do what I did, don't hate people. And he's grabbing people of different races and religions that he used to badmouth. He's out in the hallway of the doctor's office grabbing them, saying, please forgive me. Real hatred. And by another token, of course, real passion is silent. It does not have to advertise. It does not run up vexilliums. It does not wave flags. It does not spray slogans. And it does not stand around and infinitely threaten and saying, all right, you know, I've had it with you. You're about to get your ass whipped. I'm telling you, you can't talk that way about the Mets. Don't you get so close to my drink. I saw you trying to spit in my drink. You're about to get it. Real emotion. That is, they're all real, of course, but I am trying not to infer to you, the closer you get to the primary, whether it be negative or otherwise, it does not have to advertise, it does not threaten, nor does it have to promise. That is, it does not have to say, if you want to escape for a second from me taking the negative aspect, real, if you're closer to real passion, which would be sexual passion. In the same way that people, that I pointed out to you earlier, that people do not truly dislike each other for any secondary reason, individually or mass collectively, no matter what it appears to be, I know that. In spatial appearances, spatial history, spatial certainty notwithstanding, people do not dislike each other for secondary reasons. People do not like each other for secondary reasons. People who write poetry, if they still do such things, some man or some woman. Men seem to have been giddier back after the Renaissance. But of writing poetry about the sound of your voice, the way in which your interest in architecture and zucchini sculpturing parallels mine, how much, and we're both Methodist or Buddhist. That is secondary. If there is a real passion there, it's sexual. And it doesn't have to talk. Which, as long as I'm here, if you would like a obiter dictum, another little aside, I would suggest to you, if you'll notice right quick, why the more civilized a culture, a group is, the more civilized they are, the more, in fact, up to a certain point, it's an aside within an aside, up to a certain point, they're the only ones that will have it. They get attracted to such things as the Streetcar Named Desire syndrome dramas. That is, the more sophisticated they are, the more that they are attracted by the Staniel, whatever his name, Kowalski, of, Stella, come here, you. His idea of foreplay is lay down. Now, you're all aware of that. You do know it is not the Stanley Kowalskis of the world that go on Broadway and pay, nowadays, whatever it is, $50 to see that. If you go, if they were doing a revision or whatever the latest version of Tennessee Williams, those kind of stuff, of a Kowalski and that crude kind of person, and that kind of relationship, based around a sexual relationship. You go there, and who's there? You should know, all of you, most of you are already laughing, you'd be talking about an audience that is surely in the high end of the bell curve educationally, sophisticatedly speaking, just from the general realm of ordinary people. You're going to have, culturally speaking, intellectually speaking, at least the upper middle class. You're not going to have the Stanley Kowalskis of the world going to see that. They don't see anything of interest. That's their life. And they certainly don't find it attractive. Or they don't see what, it's just they'd be disinterested. Now back to what I was, at least the original aside. The closer you get, whether it be positive or negative, you're into an area that becomes increasingly silent, and therefore real passion between two people. What I was going to show you from a less negative aspect, it's simply not necessary that they keep saying, I love you. Oh, I love you. Yeah, but I love you so much. I just love you. I think about you. Yeah, but I love you a lot. If that's part of your relationship, I'm not telling anybody not to do that, but that is secondary. Now, it may be a part of your relationship. I'll repeat one more time. I'm not suggesting anybody have to stop that. If that's part of the fun, that's just part of your dance. That's part of the grooming instead of being baboons and picking off fleas. Maybe you and your mate sit around and at quiet times you say, oh, I love you. Yeah, but I love you most. Yeah, but I said it first. Yeah. That's all right. But the more that's occurring, I am suggesting to you again, the more you're in the area that I'm trying to get you to see for a very good reason, I am calling secondary. Because in the same way that I said real hatred is silent, then real, and there is no word, I'm going to have to say love, but be real sexual passion, but if you want to call it real love as opposed to ordinary love, then real love, by the same token, is silent. Because when it is at that level, not that it's better or worse, but when it's at that level, a Stanley Kowalski does not have to turn around to a Stella and say, could I buy you a wine spritzer and perhaps think up some poetry? He kind of looks at her and says, your place or mine. And if she's the right type of woman, she's probably going to say, well, if you're going to talk it to death, forget it. We might should edit that out. That may conflict with basic Scientology theology. They might defrock me or. Let's try another little area. Whereas spatial intellect, ordinary thinking, when it sees the distinction between man in here and the environment out there, it sees the distinction as being, to varying degrees, but being a wrestling match between two adversaries. Whereas if you were thinking in the future, if it was revolutionary intelligence, what you see are two quite willing participants, partners, in a precise and always a productive dance number. And this has nothing to do, other than it being the basis, but it has nothing operational to do with ordinary people's being either wired up to say, well, life's just a big old pain in the glutamus maximus, that life is going to kill us all and life sucks and all that. And those few that are wired up to go, oh, life may be hard, but it's the only life we got and we shouldn't badmouth it because Zeus may be listening in. It's not that clear cut with ordinary people. They verbalize it in that way. But it is not clear cut unless you can get free of earthbound intelligence and to realize that no matter how they're driven to talk to ordinary intelligence, yours and everybody else's, taking into account the verbal variations, they see life as having that clear division that I've suggested you, if this had some sort of operational, I won't say premise, operational. One is to realize that there is no out there separate from in here, and that it is one thing that makes that appear to be so, and that is the high end, physically speaking, of your own nervous system, known as the cortical areas, the frontal lobes of your own brain. That's the only thing that that marks a division. That's the way it measures, but there is an out there and there is an in here. There is the environment, the conditions of life, and then there is the internal states and my thoughts and my feelings, and etc. Spatial intelligence all across the board sees this division, whether it uses these terms or not. It's aware of this division, and it sees the division further as always being in some way an adversarial conflict, even if things seem to be going fairly well for the moment. Ordinary intelligence still feels, well, they may be going well, but you can't let your guard down. Because right now it could be just dumb luck, it could be fate, maybe I could be rewarded for some of my good works in the past, maybe it's through my own efforts. But no matter what it is, if you don't keep your eye on the ball, if you don't keep your nose to the grindstone and your car in gear and blah, 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 you know what's going to happen. It's going to be back just the way it basically is anyway, and that is, it's a conflict. It's a conflict between my environment and me. And of course, there is a validity to that. Through all the laws of physics, all of Newton's observations, the radioactive decay, gravity, age, atmospheric pressure, that in a quite real sense there is an adversarial relationship between you and an environment. But ordinary intelligence sees it as being a wrestling match between two identifiable adversaries, out there and in here. There is not a positive counterpart to that, although there are people who will say life's not that bad. What I'm trying to infer to you is that there is not a way to take that ordinary, systematic, template of feelings about life and the division between the man, the individual, and the environment. There is no way to simply turn that in reverse or to invert it and to say that there is a way that ordinary people could change that. They cannot change it. You should realize through your own efforts before you got here that attempting to change that kind of thinking, without even knowing my description of it, but this kind of thinking that, well, life is overbearing at times. Life is dangerous. Life will make you snivel. Life will make you mad. And there's no way out, not at the ordinary level. So you should have some awareness of that. There is no way, there is no formula in the 3D world to take that and to reverse it and to have a new direction. That is, to have some new information. The new information is what I am also trying to suggest behind my description, that revolutionary intelligence, rather than seeing this as a wrestling match, even if it still used the basis that there seems to be an in here, my own thoughts and apparent feelings, and then out there, the kind of stimuli to which I react, the kind of environment that apparently I try and have some influence upon. Rather than it being a conflict, you begin to see that it is in no wise a wrestling match. It is not a conflict, unless you're going to see dancing, unless you didn't know any better and you saw somebody doing the tango and thought they were trying to kill each other. You see it as being two, and I say willing partners just for the sake of three-dimensional talk, as if you had a choice. But it's seen as two willing partners. That is, it is not one person in the ring, on the dance floor, in some way saying, no, I don't want to do it. That is not the way life's wired up. If they didn't want to do it, they wouldn't be attracted to each other. If they didn't want to do it, they wouldn't naturally hate each other. They would not be attracted. There would not be a necessary transformation and transmission of energy for these two people or these two groups of people to be so involved, whether it appears to be in a wrestling ring, a boxing ring, or out on the dance floor. And so that's what I'm inferring by me calling it willing. But to see it as not a confrontation, not an adversarial, hostile encounter, but it's two willing partners, and they're engaged in a dance that is two P's. It is precise and it's productive. That is, when they start dancing, the output is not exactly, it is not the average, it is not the median, it is not some combination of their two dance steps. What comes out of it is new. That is the transformation of energy. That's why these two people, or these two groups, were attracted or repelled. Which you can be repelled and still dance, that doesn't matter. You might care to CF this with the general idea that is now part of intellectual Western man's, most of the planet's intellectual wiring system, of the ideas of survival of the fittest. Natural selection. The productive, precise dance going on in life itself will, for some time, some short time, some long time, will begin to adopt the steps collectively of some partners. It can be individuals, be large groups, and it can be temporally. That is spread over a period of time before life seems to adopt that this dance step, for the time being, until further notice, is newly productive. Thus me suggesting, any of you that really need another hobby, consider what life has done through thinking man in the idea, the accepted validity of natural selection. But it is seen as being competition, survival of the fittest. And it makes sense. I'm not here to deny that. It is three-dimensional. It is a reasonable, workable, three-dimensional, contemporary map. That those kinds of gradual or even abrupt mutations that might occur, then that which exercises the most influence on the environment, whether it be a bird or in humanity, then nature begins to adopt it, as they put it. But it is seen that the natural selection process comes about through competition. That is, through an adversarial relationship, even if it's just within one species or one subspecies of these particular birds. One's developed some new colors, and it seems to attract mates better than the others did, and so pretty soon, as they put it, all of this particular species of birds, within several generations, they all become brighter. But it's seen by ordinary intellect as being an outcome from a wrestling match. That is, from competition. That is, from what amounts to an adversarial relationship between this mutant bird, these several birds that got brighter, and they attracted more mates. They produced more children, so there's more to have the possibility of surviving. And so then apparently, as ordinary intelligence has it, nature seems to adopt this, and then pretty soon this class of birds, this species of birds, all become more brightly colored. The point, all of you looking strange or expectant, is that even ordinary intelligence, scientific intelligences, the Wallaces and the Darwins and everybody else, and even you, assuming you passed Biology 101, it is just accepted. It's the reasonable template of it, is this comes about through adversarial relations. That it is each species and the individual fighting the environment plus fighting its own species. That is, that little bird was wrestling with the other birds for mates. that it's seen as being an adversarial relationship. Plenty of you are still looking sort of nonplussed, and even out there on tape, as to what the purpose of me bringing this up. I'm going to do it one more time for this paragraph. A more complex intelligence would not see any of this in anything in any way resembling a negative view, that is, that it is not actually competition. It is not in some way an adversarial relationship between those two birds, between two humans, or between any individual, including a bird, but forget that, but a human and the environment. It is not adversarial. It is not competitive. What is a complete system going to compete with? If you're the only game in town, you don't have to advertise. If you're the only game in town, you don't have to claim that you're better than another game. If you're the only game in town, you have no self-doubts. If you're the only game in town, you don't think, well, I think I'll change my methods. Not only I can say why, and you might laugh, the system could not even think to ask why. Well, I'm glad I cleared that up. A more complex view, intelligence that would not be limited to spatial matters, would simply see, and this is a, I guess you got to assume that I am suggesting this has some importance. I wouldn't keep on kicking at it. It is not competitive, not in the ordinary sense. It is not adversarial. It is not opponents. And I don't care if it is Jews killing Muslims, Muslims killing other Muslims. I don't care if it's the British killing the Irish. It is not an adversarial relationship. It is not opponents. Well, you can't say I didn't tell you 2 or 3 times. It is a precise, productive dance number with 2 willing partners. Well, let's try another one. When your chorus, you know, like your Greek chorus, when your particular chorus steps forward and intones the following, well, it's got to be this or that. It's got to be one or the other. End quote. Be advised, that act is over. You are presently at a dead end. I said it was a new paragraph. This is absolutely tied to the wiring system of all of humanity, up culminating in the zenith presently of the frontal lobes. That, all right, for instance, let me think of an example. All right, how about this? What if somebody said that the apparent struggle to survive in life is not actually adversarial, but it's really between willing, positive participants without them knowing it? An ordinary intellect tried to consider it. And perhaps another observation was made by some other ordinary intellect, or even your own, that to wit, the last possibility cannot be true, or people would not kill each other. There would simply not be bloodshed, much less verbal and emotional bloodshed. So the idea that people, even people killing each other, are in some way in a profitable, precise dance is not true. So let's discount that. That was still ordinary intelligence, somebody's chorus speaking up. Or at least the intelligence. The chorus would really come in here. Then if it was considering what I just said, that I said it had to be one or the other, the chorus steps up and reinforces the possibility that it's got to be one or the other. There is no other possibility. Once you have stated the nature of this particular thought, the nature of this particular verbal game, then it's got to be one or the other. It is the end of the act forever and ever, and it appears to be a kind of reinforcement of one's intellectual acumen. That you can realize that, all right, we may have two possibilities, as strange as one of those are. But there's no doubt about it, it's got to be one or the other. It's just a matter of whether I'm intelligent enough, thank God, to recognize the absolute folly of one of the possibilities. It's the end of the act. Anytime that you are faced with life letting that energy speak out through you and you accept it, that wherever you are, that all right, this has got to be true or not true. Or this group over here has got to be correct, or else they're just absolutely blind fools. It's mass hysteria, if not worse. When the Chorus says that, and they're always saying it, you're saying it, life is saying it through man, everybody from newspapers, institutional messages are always, it's got to be this or that. There are people homeless, people living in the streets without food in the area of that recent earthquake. Those of us who are not hurt, it's either us, it's up to us. We're either going to help them or we're just going to let them die. That about covers it. Here we have groups. We have a group over here calling themselves the followers of X religion, and right across the river are the people calling themselves the followers of the Y religion, and for 3 decades, going on 2 generations, they have been killing each other at the rate of between 8 and 10% of their relative populations, year after year. Something's got to be done. And then you're given possibilities. If you don't think of them, which there's no need to, because someone else's life will make someone else point out possibilities, all the way from how this started, why it's continuing, and of course, as they like to call it, trying to deal with the big F. That's not Frankfurter, that's the big future. How we might go about stopping this. How we might cure it, or at least treat it. And it's always on the basis that it will give you 2, you and everyone else. Every political commentator, every thinker, every philosopher, everybody will give you 2 possibilities, and the Chorus will finally, assuming that you're wired up to have any magnetic, any kind of chemical attraction to this thought-wise, the Chorus will step up. You may have to consider it a split second. You may consider it a bunch of split seconds over a period of time until apparently the Chorus finally steps forward and says, well, it's got to be one or the other. And that would seem to be, at the ordinary level, at least the day of reckoning, the day of enlightenment, that you finally have to say, well, you're right, and by God, that's it. I go with this. The act is over. Taken far enough, your whole play is over. But the curtain is continually brought down on the intellect when it's got to be one or the other. And it's not that one or the other is wrong. It's that you have come to the end of that act. And it can appear to be the beginning. Well, now I'm getting somewhere. Now I've decided, all right, or now I see clearly, or now that you put it to me that way, there's nothing to think about. It's this. And it seems to be, well, now we're getting somewhere. Where you're getting is, the curtain came down that act. Since we're running out of tape, I guess I should at least end by saying something positive about either was it Scientology or zucchini sculpturing or nude clogging. But having had now about 53 minutes to think about it, I was building up to this point. One reason I was stalling and talking about things I'm sure was somewhat obtuse, but I was having to stall to think how to draw this together and make some positive comment at the end, and thankfully, of course, after 55 minutes, I can't think of any.